I think this is your third year here with us. This year as a partner. Thank you so much for your support. But each year I think it's imperative that you introduce the scale of Colgate-Palmolive. People understand Colgate as a brand, Palmolive potentially as a brand, but maybe not the scale of the organization. Talk a little about that first before we dive in.
Yeah, so a little bit about Colgate. So you probably know our toothpaste. That's the most well-known brand. In fact, it's the most household penetrated brand in the world. So we sell roughly half the world's toothpaste. Scale, and if you came last year, I probably said this, but the world uses 20 billion tubes of toothpaste a year, and we sell almost half of that. So naturally, that's a huge part of our business. But we also have other categories. We sell products in household and personal care. In the US, you would know Irish Spring or Soft Soap or even Fabuloso Cleaner. And we also own Hill's Pet Nutrition, which is Science Diet. It's premium pet food, Science Diet, prescription diet. If you have a pet, you might know it. So 4 core categories. We're 20 billion, 34,000 people, and we're very global. We sell in 200 countries around the world, and we have manufacturing operations all over the world.
So I think, we joked about asking everyone, in the room, how many of you brush your teeth this morning? But, and in this, country, we'll talk a little about the stats around that, but 10 billion toothpaste tubes. So 2 years ago, you talked about this journey towards how do you take those tubes that previously were hitting landfill because of the materials that were being used and sort of make them recyclable? And it wasn't just a, hey, of course, just let's make them plastic. It went into a lot of material science. Talk about that journey. Where are you 2 years, fast forward from when you spoke about it in 2023 here, and talk a little about the journey, and also, if you rewind and the goals you set back then to where we are today, are you happy? Are you satisfied? And where does that continue to go?
Sure. So maybe I'll start by saying, I think in my role, you can never be fully satisfied. But yeah, I love talking about the tube journey. And versus where it is a journey, first of all, versus where we started and where we are today. We kind of think of it in eras, if you will. So 2015 to almost 2020 was all about designing the tube, which you may not think is that complicated, but it was, because the old tube had aluminum and different types of plastic, so it ended up in landfill. Now it's a monomaterial plastic, and we had to make it feel like a tube. We used number 2 or HDPE, so it was very rigid. And we had, most of all, we had to protect what was inside, because people don't want to compromise on what they use every day. It's a behavioral thing, right? I want my tube to feel like a tube, and to do what it's meant to do. So I had to protect it. So then we got the design right, and we didn't do it in a vacuum. We got approval along the way from external experts like the Association for Plastic Recyclers. And then we started rolling it out at the end of 2020, let's say, and we committed to rolling all of our close to 10 million tubes out and make them all recyclable. We started in the US and in Europe because that's where the infrastructure is most ready to accept it. And now we're, finishing the next era, then 2020 to 2025 has been the rollout. We had to convert all our equipment. Not only our equipment, we make a good portion of our own tubes. So it was a lot of capital investment. So now here we are, 2025 is almost done. We're going to come, quite close, 99.9% will be converted. Don't quote me on that, but the remaining tubes are ones that have to get FDA approved because they're prescription tubes, okay? Or some joint ventures in some places in the world, but all of those tubes will be converted. So where are we focusing our efforts now is to continue to work with the recycling infrastructure, what I call the recycling value chain, to get data to better understand how many of the tubes are getting recycled. So we're working with, I was joking with John backstage. He said, see if you can get through the presentation without saying AI. So I'll talk about AI now. We're using some vision recognition technology powered by AI that helps to identify more discreetly what's actually getting sorted and how it's getting sorted, including tubes. And it's kind of cool because you can actually see the brand of tube that gets sorted and recycled. So that's
But there's an education then to also the consumer, right?
That's the next thing. Yeah. Well, we couldn't do that until more of a critical mass. Oh, that's an important point. And by the end of 23, so most of last year, we hired a third party independent company to measure the transition. Oh, important point that I forgot to mention. We shared the technology with other companies. So we've had over 100 different sessions with companies, some combined, some one-on-one, to get them to move their tubes. And it could be toothpaste, shampoo, it could be some food items come in tubes. So we want all tubes to move to this number 2 HDPE so we can get the scale we need. So we've done that. That's part of the important journey now as well. And this third-party company has measured now 95% of all tubes are number 2 HDPE. So in the US. So chances are very high, no matter what brand you use, that your tube is actually recyclable. So we would encourage you to please put it in your bin. So that's kind of where the journey is. To your point, we haven't leaned heavily into the consumer just yet because we're trying to get all our ducks in a row first, right?
So, the intellectual property, the collaboration is an interesting point, because I think over the past couple of years of doing this event, the word collaboration continues to come up. It's industries, companies need to share how they can move their initiatives forward. But it's not only about collaboration externally, it's about collaboration internally. Mm-hmm. So you've spent over a decade at Colgate holding different roles, not just, sort of be up before your role in sustainability. Talk about getting about internal alignment. So, again, these things cost money, investment into CapEx, into OpEx. Mm-hmm. They may not have a near-term ROI. Talk about how you have to internally collaborate with your peers, and what that looks like for anyone here who's in a sustainability role in a big company. How do you make those cases internally to move these projects forward?
So we believe every function has a role to help us move our sustainability and social impact strategy forward and achieve the targets we set for ourselves. And actually, I've been over 3 decades at Colgate. So,
oh, wow.
So I know a lot of people. That's a good starting point. Most of my career was in the supply chain, which I think is very helpful for a couple of reasons, because that's kind of where our program is anchored in many of the areas that you just mentioned in terms of investment, ROI, et cetera, because we've been doing a lot in our operations, in our factories. And I think actually the business case is pretty actually straightforward there. Making our energy and water use and even air use that all contributes to making our products more efficient is just good business. It reduces costs. It also reduces impact. So supply chain, I think, is probably the best embedded, or the best longest standing partner, maybe I'll put it that way, including procurement. We talked about procurement last year. They play a huge role in purchasing a lot of the materials and helping to manage the cost. More recently, we've been working with finance and IT to help us get the data we need, help to automate that, look for AI use cases, and finance, because even though they're changing all the time, there's still regulations out there that we're going to have to comply with. The most pressing one for us is California climate. So finance is really kind of partnering with us now to get ready for those regulations. And then externally, it's still very important, the partnerships. I think one of the things that's impressed upon me this week, which I didn't expect actually, but it's been, I would say, my number one key takeaway the first couple of days of Climate Week, is this need to take collective action to the next level. I think Lindsay talked about that a little bit in the last panel with John, but it's really not just coming together with other companies to say, oh, let's figure this out together. It's now companies coming together and actually pooling funding or going into joint action projects. There were a number of resilience projects talked about in the food and beverage industry this week. So I won't name names, but there's been quite a few announcements.
Right. So, the tube, obviously one of your core, ambitions, preserving our environment, fits in there. Also driving social impact. So talk about this, bright smiles, bright futures. This week, while it is Climate Week, it's also UNGA. Many of us are wearing the SDG pin. So it's about sustainability and impact broader than just climate. But, when we first met, I told you I'm a third generation, and I decided not to become a dentist. My dad was a dentist. My grandfather was a dentist. I chose a different route, but obviously oral health was always talked about in our household. Talk about how Colgate sees your initiatives around oral health in underserved communities, both from an impact standpoint, but also from a markets and opening markets opportunity.
Yeah, so we have a program, and we call it Bright Smiles, Bright Futures. We've been delivering this program for close to 30 years. And what it is simply put, it's an oral health and hygiene education program where we, teach children in mostly underserved communities around the world about oral health and how to brush their teeth. And we give them, toothbrushes, toothpaste to take home to their families. In many parts of the world, kids don't have access, families don't have access to this. And this is critically important. Caries, as we call it, or cavities, is the number one disease amongst children globally. And the World Health Organization several years ago declared finally oral health as a gateway to your overall health. It's an indicator. So there's a lot of benefit to proactively driving oral health. And we feel that because we're the number one oral health provider in the world from a consumer product standpoint, that we need to lead the way there. So that's how we developed Bright Smiles, Bright Futures. So we call that one of our kind of lead social impact actions. And now what I'm excited about, and we're going to be talking later today at the Goals House about about health and the intersection with climate. And I think where we go next is starting to draw the connections between all of these things. So think about climate and the impact on water. And, this is the quiet crisis. I think I've spent a lot of time on the topic of water this week. 2 billion people don't have access to clean water and sanitation. And that's growing. At the same time, the issues related to water and day zero, I heard on Monday from a government official from Cape Town, and about 10 years ago, they had a day zero where they didn't have access to water, and it's frightening actually. And this is starting to happen. And if you don't have access to water, you can't brush your teeth, you can't wash your hands. You have to really have to think twice about those basic necessities. So there's starting to become an intersection for us anyway of oral health access. And then you asked about how is that important to us from a business standpoint. It's not lost on anyone that if we teach people how to brush their teeth and give them product and provide affordable product for them to buy, that we will drive loyal users and further penetration. So there's more room to grow.
So a lot of times people talk about trade-offs, right? This idea of, there is a doing well, there is a doing good. Sometimes it's a trade-off. They don't go hand in hand. I think in that case, you could show that it does go hand in hand. But when you're posed with trade-offs, especially ones where there's short-term investment that may not yield business value immediately, but may have a midterm or longer-term effect, how do you what does that internal process look like, that struggle between an R&D for a new tube that maybe over time is cheaper to produce, but is going to cost a lot up front? What does that conversation look like?
Yeah, it's tricky, no doubt. And trade-offs, I I like to think that's not just true of the work I'm doing and issues I'm doing. It's even true of how we approach AI in our company or any other big, transformative initiative. I do think the pressure to better articulate and have more robust discipline around value creation for the work we're doing is there. So that pressure is there. But what we're doing is definitely longer term. We just talked about the tube transition. That's been a 10-year journey. So we are working closely with I mentioned the finance team, to look at different angles. I think we have to have some innovation in how we measure return, if you will. The traditional ROI doesn't always work in this space. But there's a lot of avoidance benefits. And by avoidance is interesting because that doesn't hit your P&L directly. But I'll give you an example on climate. We've been driving efficiencies in our operations since 2002. And since we've begun measuring that, or since we've started measuring that, we've avoided close to $1 billion of energy or electricity bills. So in other words, if we hadn't have taken those steps to be more efficient, we would have spent that money. So that's called avoidance. And the same goes with packaging, because I'm not sure if the audience is familiar with EPR, or Extended Producer Responsibility. It's a terrible acronym, but it's basically the fees that companies pay for the amount of plastic they use. And that's on the rise, and it's coming fast and furious to the States too. I'm not going to say. There's at least half a dozen states that are implementing that now. And it's kind of spreading. So that means we're paying more and more fees related to the plastic we use. So if we can make them recyclable or reduce the amount of plastic we use, those are fees we're avoiding. So that's another way to think of the financial benefit. But these are not quick.
Yeah, I think when the SDGs were originally defined, they said it was a multi-trillion-dollar business opportunity. Now they've realized it's in the tens of trillions to solve these problems. So there is real business benefit. I want to end on, again, there's 3 key pillars across your ambitions. We covered preserving our environment, driving social impact, helping millions of homes is a third. Just talk a little about, as this continues to evolve, where you see your group having, the biggest impact on homes, families, and the population.
So what Josh just outlined, what we call our 3 ambition pillars in our strategy, and we have carefully selected actions under each. One of them is anchored in the Bright Smiles. One of them is anchored in eliminating plastic waste and climate and so forth. Those are kind of areas where we want to lead. And you asked me earlier, are you satisfied? There's more work to be done. So this was our strategy for 2025. We are, and 2025 the clock is ticking. So we've been busy working on our 2030 strategy. And what we're not ready to roll it out with targets just yet externally. We're aligning internally. But what I like to say is that it's going to be an evolution, not a revolution, because there is more work to be done. We're going to stay focused on those areas of oral health, plastic, and climate. And we are going to get more disciplined about the value creation aspect. We consider that as a transformative enabler for our overall business strategy.
And again, under the current administration, the focus, again, externally, it's obviously, we did change the name of this event from Techonomy Climate to Techonomy Impact, partially because we wanted it to have a broader conversation, as well as some of the response to climate, in a current, political landscape. Does that change, sort of how you think about it, or is it sort of full steam ahead?
And I think Lindsay also said earlier she was very excited because of the optimism, and this is the biggest climate week yet, which I wasn't sure what to expect, but I'm pleased, and lots of good, rich conversation. I think we're all what I'm hearing, and you're probably hearing the same, is we're doing this because it's the right thing for the business. You can't argue that Bright Smiles, Bright Futures is not good for our business. So we have to do this work, but we are being more careful about the narrative and what we're saying. Similarly, we've tweaked the language on our climate target. It did have climate change in it. Now it has resilience in it. So more to come when we roll it out next year. But so we're being very thoughtful about the language and the tone, but that just keeps, the noise out, and so we can focus on moving forward.
Well, Anne, thank you for all the great work you're doing. Thank you for being a great supporter of this event. I really appreciate you being here, and Colgate's, again, gracious support. So thanks again.
Thanks,
Round of
Josh.
applause.